Good evening, everybody. If I could call the Galloway Crabapple Action Evening to order, please. Thank you very much. It might sound just like a slightly emotional evening. I have a little bit of a frog in my throat, but I think it's probably the emotion of the evening more than anything else. So I'm sorry about that. I'll try and speak. Please come on through. So really kind of joined us here, people joining us here in the room and online as well. So many thanks, people around the world. We're going to drastically increase the level of understanding and appreciation of Galloway crabapples through one event. This is going to be quite good. I'd like to start with a joke because I said a joke last week and it didn't land very well. And I've learned it's never the content, it's never the material, it's how people respond to my jokes. It's their problem, frankly. So I'm going to give it another shot now. And I'm going to see if we can land a little bit better, because this evening's event is hybrid in format, but not hybrid in content. Way! Brilliant. Okay, don't overdo it. So, thank you. So my name is McNab Laurie. I'm working for a new organisation, Dumfries and Galloway Woodlands. If you haven't heard of Dumfries and Galloway Woodlands yet, remember where you were when you heard it for the first time. We're looking at trees, habitats, and the people that depend on them across the entirety of Dumfries and Galloway. So we've got support from Woodland Trust, from Borders Forest Trust. Why is there a Borders Forest Trust and there isn't a Dumfries and Galloway equivalent? A question I know many of you spend your evenings concerned about. Well, worry no more, because we're looking to address that with Dumfries and Galloway Woodlands. We've got a new website, dgwoodlands.org.uk. You can sign up for a mailing list, and you can even sign up to be a member as well. And that's open even to people online, as well as the people in the room tonight. So now that we'll work to a white-hot level of excitement, I'd like to hand you over to Jules Cox, who I think is going to get us kicked off on the evening.
Just going to set the scene a little bit first. I march to the fields feeling crabbit, cross dikes, stumble through long wet grass, trip on rabbit holes, stomp, fume, despair. Yows merp at me as I invade their space. I merp back, scowling. I stop. Slowly I gather crabapples. Malus sylvestris. Malice, evil one, from Eve who dared to pluck the fruit. Sylvestris, shrubby, scrubby, spiky, sharp. Our native tree stands here alone, but for me, the cows and the yows. The clouds of sour, hard green, tiny scroggies that grew in autumn turned yellow in winter's chill and hang now as Christmas baubles. Those fallen from the dark, gnarled, twisted branches feed mice, cows, crows. I gather, I calm. Cold, wet grass clings to my hands and my basket grows pleasingly heavy. I breathe the air, deliciously thick with cow breath and frosted apples. Later, in my larder, glowing golden orbs nestle in stout glass jars, enrobed in sticky syrup, enriched with spices, transformed, sour to sweet. Ready to embellish roasted hams, platter of pungent cheese, or top creamy bowls of Cranachan. Soft, succulent, mellowed rage.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jules. So, as you all came in tonight, most of you came in tonight, sorry for any late arrivals, you were handed a crab apple. And so I wonder if we could start off the evening, Jules. Why are we talking about crab apples?
Well, because the tree is beautiful, bountiful, and useful. It offers fruit for cooking, bark for dyes, wood for instruments, food for animals, and it's used in herbal medicines, and it's very beneficial to insects, so it makes a great addition to the local biodiversity. Also because it's one of the true native trees of Scotland. I mean, it's the least understood and very much underappreciated native tree. Before the recent Darwin Tree of Life genome project sparked interest, there was no scientific papers or articles on the ecology or genetics of crabapples. And although it's one of the oldest Scottish native trees, it's not even listed as such, even by the forestry departments. Also, these wild apples, although small and green and sour, had genetic qualities that could prove beneficial to future domestic apple breeding. They seem to be disease resistant and pest resistant. They've adapted to adverse climate conditions, which are useful traits to mitigate against climate change, and essential if virus or bacteria wipe out domestic inbred weakened species, varieties. That means that their unique natural genetic diversity is vital to food security. Wild forest apples are central to many myths and legends and traditions. And these stories that we often hear about apples and the traditional stories about apples were usually about the wild apple. And they're very much part of our culture and heritage. We're talking about them because the humble crabapple is under threat. The genetic integrity of the trees is being undermined by hybridization. That's the cross-pollination with domestic apples and the introduction of hybridized varieties that have been brought in by nurseries and often imported. Also, they're being scrubbed up and tidied away. Scrubby knolls of gorse and hawthorn and often crabapple in pastures are being flattened to make way for silage. But the main reason we're talking about them and why we need to act is that we've found that we've got a high propensity of pure wild apples in Galloway. We're a hotspot for a species that's rare and endangered, as endangered as the wildcat is in the Highlands. Our trees need protection and care, and it's our duty to look after this precious resource.
So as you came in tonight, you were handed a crabapple. We weren't able to provide this to the online audience, I'm afraid, due to various red flags that would have caused sending crabapples around the world. But people in the room here have received their own crabapple. And before so there's been a project recently trying to address these points. Before we get into that, could you tell us a bit more about crabapples themselves, Jules?
Yes. What we're not talking about are the ornamentals, the golden hornet and the John Downies. We're not talking about the crabapple in the park or probably in your garden. And we're not talking about the ones that are generally on the roadsides. They'll be hybridized crabapples, ones that have pollinated, cross-pollinated, or they've been introduced. These are all wonderful trees in their own right, and all the benefits and attributes of the crabapple are the same with all of the crabapples. But this isn't what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about the wild apple. It's the native forest wild apple we're talking about, Malus sylvestris, European wild apple belonging to the rose family, one of the first plant families to colonize after the Ice Age, and a native to the whole of Northern Europe, right up to North Norway. It's got many names. It's called wild apple, forest apple. In Ireland, it's called abal. It's called a gribble, a grindstone apple, because you can sharpen a knife on the wood. Scroggy, that's a very local name around here. Bitters gall, wilding tree, and griggles are the small little apples that are left on the tree in the winter, which look very pretty. And there's many other regional names. So it's Malus sylvestris. The Latin word malus means bad, evil, malpractice, malfunction, all those words, seen as a negative. Malignant, malnourished, all those. But malum, another Latin noun, is taken from the Greek, means apple. And sylvestris translates as silver, which is for wood, and vestris refers to the manner of growth, being scrubby, shrubby, gnarled, twisted, and crabbed, the twigs often developing spines to give it a crabby nature. So the crabapple has a bit of a poor press, evil and scruffy. And if you're feeling grumpy, nippy, possibly a bit sour, you may say you're feeling crabbit, like in the poem. This is why, despite being one of the prettiest and highly productive native trees of Scotland, the crabapple was least understood and very underappreciated, despite it being found in ancient woodland remnants all over Britain and Northern Europe.
And so this is wild. We're interested in
This
the
is
wild apples. How do
wild
you
apple.
identify a wild apple? You have some examples here, possibly.
There we go. There's some. It's have we got pictures? We have got pictures. It's a deciduous, broadleaf, dome-shaped, slow-growing tree. It can grow to 10 to 15 meters. It's got a huge dome, a huge canopy, really tight, twisted branches, so it looks like a sort of a fog of branches when you see it in the distance. Often found in ancient woodland, in remnant ancient pasture, sometimes alone in pasture, and sometimes mixed with hawthorn, gorse, and broom on scrubby knolls, but also in clumps, sometimes in clumps due to a habit of suckering. The leaves are small, green, glossy, oval leaves, more roundish than a domestic apple. Domestic apple leaves tend to have more length to them. Crab apple leaf is more this sort of shape. It tends to have a little point on the top. It's got triangular teeth, alternate on the shoot, and distinctively the underside has few or no hairs. Most of the time, not all the time. There are some which fool even the experts and do have a downy underneath. But generally, if they're small and glossy, slightly curled, slightly crumpled little leaves with no down underneath, and the fruit is small and dark and green, then there's a chance that it is a wild apple. The bark is smooth and green-brown. There's the bark there. With orange breathing pores, and older trees have scaly ridges. That came from quite an old tree. And the buds are reddish, as you can see. A bud on there. Tiny buds at the top, a sort of a reddish colour. The blossom, we should have some pictures of blossom at some point, consists of white or pink flowers in clusters of 4 to 7, appearing with the leaves in May. And they stand out on their own glory until in early May, until they're overwhelmed by the hawthorn. It's really good time to find and identify crab apples in the early May, because once the hawthorn comes out, it sort of takes over and you can't find them. And they're often difficult to spot in mixed woodland because the understory has grown up and the blossom tends to be on the very top of the tree. The fruit, as we've seen, are globe-shaped. There's obviously a tendency to have quite a long stalk. They're about 2 to 3 centimeters across. They start off green and then tend to turn yellow sometimes with quite a flush of pink. And they carry the remnants of the flower at the base. They have a sharp, dry, slightly sour taste when raw. They're usually gathered in September to October, but may stay on the tree right through till the following spring, sometimes still on the tree when the new leaves grow. When old, the tree often splits out. You often see them with a branch going this way and that way, and they can be hollowed out, but the split out branches often tip to the ground, and then the limbs can get into the soil, and then they start up a new tree, a phoenix tree. They're very good at regenerating themselves. They're very long-lived. They can live 100, 200 years, and some have a girth of at least 1.5 meters. We have some big specimens in Galloway.
And so the great phrase I heard the other day was the tree that pays stays, or the tree's got to justify itself. So what are the uses? What are the uses of this wild crab apple?
Well, there's evidence of long-standing use. Wild apples have been found in Neolithic and Bronze Age sites all over Europe. In woodworking, as we saw in here, the wood is really, really hard. It's still used a lot more in Europe than it is here, and it would be a good thing to try and promote. But it used to be used for making very fine instruments, for making set squares and drawing instruments, because it's so hard. It's so hard because it's very slow growing. And also, as I said before, it can be used for sharpening tools. It's used for dyeing. You can dye cloth. It comes out in a sort of yellow colour. I've got that with me. You can make ink from the bark and the leaves. Ed and Lucy, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Ed and Lucy's at Old Mill Gallery at Palnackie. They do some wonderful courses where they make inks and paints from natural materials, and we made some from crabapple leaves and bark. And they're running courses showing artists how to use more sustainable materials. They're great pollinators. Bees frequent the pollens freely, moths in the nighttime, hoverflies and other pollinating insects. And crabapples increase the biodiversity of hedges and woodlands. Of course, all these uses are for all crabapples, not just the native ones, but this is the native ones as well. In cooking, the Celts and the Vikings would have made the fruit more palatable by fermenting, drying. These are dried crabapple slices that can be just put into hot water and made into a tea. Cooking and drying with natural sugars. In Middle Ages, crabapple was made into something called verjuice, which was used as like an apple vinegar, which they used instead of lemons before lemons came in. And of course, what everybody knows is the crabapple jelly. This one's got some thyme in it. Today we make jellies, jams, cheeses, wine, cider vinegar, and we could make Galvados. Why not? They can be dried to make tea, as I said, and made into edible fruit leather. The high pectin content of the fruit means they're a good addition to any jam ingredients to aid setting. You can have, whatever fruit you're using, you can add a crabapple juice and it helps it set. Toffee crabapples were sold at fairs by travellers folk, and the word toffee apple comes from Romany language, lolla for red and popple for apple. They also have medicinal uses. In the Bach flower remedies, crabapple is used as a cleanser, to cleanse the mind, to cleanse the spirit. It's said that people are sort of over tidy, a bit OCD and putting things away and everything. If they take crabapple, then they can calm down a bit. And used as a poultice, they're said to cure cramps and sprains.
So we've got all these uses. We've identified the difference between wild apple and not wild apple. So a project came about to try and build on this understanding. Is that right?
That's right. Well, we have to go back to 1992 when UK signed up with the Biodiversity Convention to conserve species and conserve genetic diversity. And this triggered many people to think about local plants and their genetic makeup. So in 2016 to 17, Rick Worrell and James Rennie conducted a survey of wild forest apples in Scotland and took lots from Galloway, particularly from Maz and Richard's farm. And they collected leaf samples and had them DNA tested by Marcus Roosham at the Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh. In 2018, they returned to Galloway with the interesting and very exciting results. They showed that at least 75% of their samples, the Galloway crabapple samples, were native Scottish forest apples. So this threw up lots of questions. How long have they been here? Why have they not hybridized like most apples in the UK? How are they distributed? What are their favoured locations? Could Galloway be a hotspot for native pure apples? And what do we do with this knowledge, and how would we proceed? Lots of questions to be answered, and the data analysis expanded. So Marcus and Rick and James and Will Jessup and Graham Finley wrote a paper at that time on their findings, a really comprehensive paper on the ecology and genetics of the crabapple. And then in 2021, the Darwin Tree of Life project was launched at the Wellcome Sanger Institute, which was to sequence the genomes of 60,000 species in the UK. And to date, 25 different apple varieties, that's the domestic apple zone, but including the crabapple, have been had their genetic blueprint sequenced by the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. So it was time for a local project to take this a little bit further and find out, answer some of these questions locally. It was time so that we could preserve the knowledge and the seeds for the future. So in March 2022, the project stepped up a gear with some funding from the Galloway Glens Landscape Partnership.
Great project. That's a great project. I hear great things about it.
Myself and Jenny Stevenson of Southwest Community Woodland Trust, with the help and expertise from Maz Smythe and Richard Cunningham, undertook furthering the project to encompass the community, education, cultural heritage, food futures, climate change, social history, art and well-being. There were so many aspects of local crabapples to be explored that each question led to another. But the first thing was identification and a collection of the leaves, and then further DNA testing. So early that July, citizen scientists that were volunteers from the public were given guidelines and directed to trees in locations, trees that they thought that after we'd given them the identification keynotes, identified trees that we thought would be pure natives, and they collected leaves. We would put them into plastic bags with silica gel, and we sent them off to Marcus. The location of the trees were recorded by OS grid reference, and that's what happened.
And
we sent off 114 samples.
And what were the results?
Well, the results came back and were even more exciting than before, because out of 113 samples, there was one that didn't work. 92 were definitely native Malus sylvestris. That was 81% of our samples, which is a very high propensity compared to other locations in Britain and Northern Europe. And so in March 2023, we had interest from Gail Volk from the US Department of Agriculture, who asked for seeds for their seed bank, and Nick Howard in the Netherlands, who wanted some leaf samples of our natives for genetic mapping of crabapples in Europe. And the research goes on.
It's very, very unlike Galloway to be different from other places in a way, Jules. But why here? Why has that happened here, do you think? Why have we got such a high population percentage?
We can only speculate at the moment. We can only speculate. A lot of our trees are on the west coast, so a lot of those apples might have been distributed via the waterways, bringing them into the coves, coming down from the rivers. Quite a few of the trees are on the river banks. Because they're on the west coast and they're quite isolated, quite a long way from any domestic trees or possibly hybridized trees, there's not a great orchard culture in Galloway. There used to be an orchard in Kirkcudbright. Well, still is an orchard in Kirkcudbright, but 100 years ago there weren't many domestic trees. So bees, if they're flying against the wind, if they're trying to find trees to pollinate, they're not going to fly miles and miles from a domestic tree in Kirkcudbright all the way to the west coast against the wind to pollinate a crabapple over there. So perhaps they didn't. Perhaps they avoided that. Most of our trees, as I said, are far away from domestic or ornamental apples. They're very resilient. They can brave the westerlies, the sea salt, and they can brave being nibbled again and again by deer and cattle and sheep. There weren't so many sheep up in the coastal areas. Cattle grazing is a lower density here, and they may have been spread by cattle eating them and distributing the seeds in cowpats that in turn act as nutrient and protection for the seedlings.
So we've established the very high local population of wild apple. We've got people in the room, we've got people at home. What's happening next, and how can people get involved to protect native apples?
Well, we're growing, now we've identified the trees which are pure wild apple. We can gather the seeds from those. So we're growing the native crabapples from seeds, and we've started doing that just in the garden. These are trees that are the ones that have definitely been DNA tested, and they're way away from any trees, at least 500 meters away from any suspected non-native trees. This is what Martha says, at least 500 meters, but I'd say as far away as possible. These trees take approximately a year to get 10 centimeters tall. They're then planted into a nursery bed to be protected from voles and deer. Unfortunately, our ones that were at 3 got nibbled by voles. That's our first year's lot disappeared. So that's this one. This one's been extraordinary. These came from Carrick's bed, and that's just 1 year's growth. And they were both in the same pot. And that one's only, that big. And this one's a monster. It's done really well. When 20 meters tall, at least, they could be planted out with landowners' permission, obviously, in remote areas away from non-native trees. And then we'll try and monitor these trees. And
20 centimeters tall.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. It came across as meters. I don't know.
Sorry,
20 centimeters. Just for anyone who's following on from home, 20 centimeters tall. We're looking for.
Which is like that, really. That's big enough to plant out.
Big enough to plant out right here.
Yeah. So we'll obviously keep a record of the location, and we want to set up a seed orchard. So some of the trees, because people keep saying, well, couldn't we just graft them? That'll be a bit quicker because it takes such a long time for them to grow. These ones in St Mary's Isle, from this one from St Mary Isle, that's 2 years growth from that tree, and they're tiny. So it just does seem to be different from different trees. But we did try.
That's due to where it is, you think? Or...
I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? So it was suggested that we should do some grafting, and Rick Worrell came and collected some twigs from Mazen Richards' farm again, and I did these at a grafting course that we ran as part of the Galloway Glens Landscape Partnership Trust, and most of them took. So you can put grafted trees out, but you do have to look after them, because a grafted tree, if that got nibbled down to there, say, it's likely to start growing from the bottom, and then it's growing on its rootstock, which is not pure native. But if you put them into a seed orchard, if you have a well-maintained and looked after seed orchard, so you've got your seeded plants and you've got some grafted plants, you can use the seeds from the top, as long as you're making sure that the mother tree is not being, they're not coming from the bottom. And you will get those seeds a bit quicker. Okay. So that's what we're doing. Farmers and landowners can keep a lookout for crabapple trees on their land, and hopefully ensure that they're protected and that the surrounding ancient woodland remnants are preserved if possible. And to increase the number of trees, crabapples can be randomly placed in cowpats. These, if there's low grazing rates and no sheep. Cows and horses pass seeds through feces, and crabapple trees are spread this way. We'll hear from Mazen Richard a bit later on, and they'll talk a bit more about this. So then the trees grown from DNA tested tree seeds that come from these tree orchards can then be planted out on farms and in hedgerows. If a landowner has several trees, like approximately about 50, you can register them with the European Forest Genetic Resources Network and set up a gene conservation unit. And this is a new project that's just started. You can follow the guidelines for estate management and help with genetic conservation. So far, crabapple hasn't been registered with a research plot, but Maz and Richard are hoping to change that. Local sites could be included in the scheme. Are Tors Point at Auchencairn and Borg, there's some, and Almaness Point. There's a lot out there. And there may be many more. We're on the lookout for them, so we keep a lookout. And people without land can still gather crabapple trees from the trees that we've identified. Now the trees are on the on the website, there's the map with the OS references, so you can go out and find the trees, and then grow them and plant the seeds and grow them on yourself. And you've all got a crabapple in your hand. You can go home and plant the seeds now. And next year you might have, well, sometimes they have 8 seeds in them. You could have 8 trees ready to plant out. And then plant them out, protect them in the early years, and let us know the location. So the vision is that the Galloway Hills becomes like the mountains of Kyrgyzstan, where there's crab apples everywhere. And we want to designate the 15th of May as Scotland's Day of the Wild Apple. Japan has Cherry Blossom Day. Why can't we have Crab Apple Day, Wild Apple Day? And then people can cycle out to them, sit under the tree, have a picnic, and enjoy them. So let's go back to why we're doing this, and then I'll let other people have the floor. Wild apples seem to be disease resistant, pest resistant, and have adapted to adverse climate conditions, useful traits to mitigate climate change, and essential if virus or bacteria wipes out the domestic inbred weakens varieties. Their unique and natural genetic diversity is vital for food security, and they have to be revered.
Brilliant. Jules has done a lot of work with crab apples in recent years. Can we do a quick round of applause just for what Jules has done? We do have a couple of pre-arranged questions just to drag the discussion in the direction in a contrived manner, but just to cover a couple of points. We're very lucky to have Sam here with us tonight, who's actually been working with crab apples. And I wonder, Sam, could you give us a few words about how you've seen them from a management point of view?
So I work on a 3,500 acre estate just north of Dumfries, and we have about 500 acres of woodland on the estate. So we plant about 10 hectares of new woodland creation every year, and we do about 3 kilometres of new hedges and hedge rejuvenation. So the intention is that we have some areas of the estate where we have some crab apples on the estate, and they're mainly ornamental ones or ones that have snuck into hedgerows over the years. But we have quite a few areas of the estate where we don't have any crab apples at all. So the intention is that we grow some crab apples in a small tree nursery that I've built, and we plant them in new hedgerows because apparently they do very well in hedgerows. They lay quite well, and we do lay we started laying some of our hedges as well. And we have individual trees in fields as well. Our fields are quite intensely grazed, so we have to put them in tree boxes. But the intention is that we have quite a few crab apples come on, and we start to build up that kind of genetic pool and have a few more natives. And they're lovely things to look at, as you say.
You took some of our crab apples last year, didn't you?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Grew them on.
You gave me some last year, Jules. Some of them they did. Some of them didn't do so well, so we've maybe got 3 or 4 from last year. And then this year, the end of last summer, I went around and I went to some of the grid references where you've got the lovely kind of veteran crab apples, and I took a whole load of crab apples, planted them in the nursery, and we'll see what happens in the spring. Hopefully we'll have a whole load. And if anyone's got any spare ones that they want me to plant, then all the better.
Sure. Thank you. That's quite an intimidating effort you're making there, Sam. That's very, very good to hear. And we've got a couple of photos. I think we could cut a couple of photos. We want to explore this idea of trees and farming. And I'd love, Maz and Richard, would you be happy to say something about how they fitted into the farm, how crab apples are fitted in?
Yeah, so our crab apples are a very different kettle of fish, I think, in the sense that they've got quite a big native population of mature wild apple trees. So hence we have a lot of fruit. And our main dispersal agent probably is the cow. So and through the cowpat, all of our wild apples are coming up naturally, and probably the pip in the cow patch. Yeah. So ready, good to go. Good to go. I have no idea how many, what our germination success is. Might be 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, but it doesn't matter.
We get about 10 new trees each year, do you think?
Oh, 10 or 20 new trees each year. And I suppose the point is that you would never expect to find a crabapple forest, a wild apple forest. It's it's one tree in a matrix. So if every 100th tree is a crabapple, that's the density you're looking for, perhaps. So we're slowly building up a new wild apple population.
Thank you.
Can we also talk about why the crabapple seedlings can actually survive so well in cowpats? Because cows don't like eating their own cowpats. It's kind of natural, like horses don't either. So if the little baby crabapple seedling grows in a cowpat, it's got a whole year of not being grazed on an extensive grazed farm. A whole year that it can just get away. It might become quite thorny, quite spiky, quite a little character of a tree. It's only about 3 inches tall, but the cow isn't going to eat it for that first year. So that gives it a real chance of survival. Incidentally, this picture here is a tree that the cows haven't found yet, because some of our cows have really got a taste for crab apples. They can spend half an hour, an hour just eating the whole lot. We're not quite sure how drunk they get, because they must do. Anyway.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks so much, Maz. It was lovely. I haven't had that many photos of poo in my inbox since I stood for political office, which obviously is there is a comment I should mention there. So I think, could I hand it back to you, Jules? Can you buy native crab apples ever? You've already talked about how complicated it is to find a native tree. And then also, if you pick the fruit from a native tree, it might not be native fruit that you're picking. So there's a number of levels of complexity to it. But how can someone who's been inspired by the journey you've been on get into the crab apple game?
Well, it is quite difficult to buy them. It is difficult to buy pure natives. Rick Worrell, who's obviously a busy man, he's always writing papers, but he wrote a paper, him and James Rennie, with Marcus Rusum again, a paper on, they did a whole survey of tree nurseries all over Britain, and then they had DNA tested the samples from the trees that they bought at the tree nurseries. And they found, I can't remember how many they tested, but there were only two nurseries that were pure, absolutely pure. Luckily, one of those is nearby in Renfrewshire, and it's a Scottish nursery. It's a social enterprise. It's run by a lovely man called Peter Livingston, who's also an aspen expert, and other rare native trees. And I contacted him the other day, and he says he has about 100 trees at the moment, and but he's willing to take our seeds, and he gets wild seeds from other people over the country who also got DNA tested pure seed, and pass them on to him for him to grow in his nursery. So hopefully he'll have more. So that's all the details of everything I've talked about, all the papers that I've mentioned, and the details of the nursery, and the papers that I've taken research from are all going to be on the website, the D&G Woodlands website. So you can look up all these papers, and they're very worth reading.
And I think an interesting point is a lot of what you've been uncovering, Jules, we always used to know as society, didn't we? It's a case of recovering what we used to know, and so hopefully we can use some of this technology to try and bank that now and build from there and increase our understanding.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So Jules, thanks so much. Is there any questions in the room we'd like to put to Jules about the journey she's been on?
I just wondered what value there is to wildlife. What animals, what birds feed on this, or squirrels?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cows, the cows and the sheep, and all the mammals, badgers, squirrels, mice, crows. Yeah, they're a huge benefit to birds, animals, and insects. They're definitely, they're very, very useful for insects. As a
Any that get left, all of the autumn thrushes will get one of the
Yeah.
fieldfares and wax.
That was a comment about autumn thrushes and fieldfares benefiting from it as well. Wasn't it? So,
The ones up at Tall Point, I went to collect some apples because there's usually quite a lot there, and I went to get some for seed. And they were completely gone, and they were all completely eaten out. You know, they were hollow shells, so it was probably mice or squirrels. Yeah.
any other questions in the room we can put to Jules? Yes. Oh,
I can shout.
you can bellow. I'll repeat it for the people at home. That's fine.
Like, given our own trees, is there any easy way to tell whether they're native or hybrid by inspection, or do we have that sequence?
So looking any easy identifiers, or whether it's a native tree you're looking at.
Underneath the leaf and seeing if it's got if it's slightly downy. That's the most. The apples are usually bigger than this. They're usually, you know, so that's a sort of a general size, and smaller. Some of the really true natives have got much smaller leaves and much smaller, very green, hard crab apples. So ones that are slightly bigger, say that size, would be a bit suspect, I would say. Oh, it did come from that tree. It did come from Carrick.
If they are native, would you discourage us from growing other kinds of apple around them?
Should we actually be try and be putting a buffer zone around a native tree that we find?
Yeah, that is a point. It's honestly, I can't tell people how to do their gardening, but and say no, don't plant any eating apples when you need, you know, we need food. Just there are plenty of the wild apples, but I think it's try not to put domestic apples out near ones that are growing in the wild, you know, out with your garden.
Brilliant. Any other questions? Yes, I'll come to Matt again.
I just wanted to say, I mean, the project that you've been running with Galloway Glens, of course, the last couple of years, it was a citizen science project. Hundreds of people got involved in that. Do you want to talk about how interested people are in wild apples and what pleasure they seem to have got from that?
Yes, we had a lot of people wanted to be involved and were involved. It was a real team effort, and then they follow up with lots of emails asking what the results were, and we passed results on to everybody. And then we had the OS references out, and people were really proud to have them in their garden and know that they've got them and say, wow, these are my trees. And then they bought a couple of tea towels and sent them to their friends because my tree is on that map. So the whole sort of ownership of their pure native tree. Also from a sale of the tea towel, somebody looked at the website and looked at the project and then offered to grow some seeds on, came to me, got some seeds, and he's got already got 2 or 3 seed beds growing in his garden, and he's going to start a wee nursery. And I get emails, several a week, asking where I can buy native crabapple trees, where I can whether they can join the project. They know where people know where there's a tree, and can they have it DNA tested. So for the future, we would like to further the project and DNA test more trees and find out, you know, we might have some other areas where there's a lot of trees that can be part of this genetic conservation unit. We could have a much higher proportion than we think.
This could be just the very start, Jules. If you wouldn't mind committing the next 6 years of your life to this, Jules.
Well, we do need some money in order to do the DNA testing. Costs quite a lot. So anybody wants to donate to the project, I think there's a donate button on your website, is there not?
So did I see another hand up at the back? Yes. Do you mind if I come to you just for the purposes of the people at home? They can hear your authentic question.
Oh, hello. I wondered if you're going to run any courses to show us how to do all these things you've been speaking about, you know, drying them, because, I mean, you've got an audience here that are already sort of convinced. But I mean, I know that I've walked past these and I mean, they mean nothing. You know, they're just part of the landscape rather than something I'd pick and take home. So do you think that you might run some courses showing us what we can do, all the lovely things, apart from the crabapple jelly, which is the jelly makers all do that. But, you know, a lot of us wouldn't probably go there because it's not something we've ever done.
Well, through Southwest Community Woodland Trust, which is what the organisation that ran this project, we run grafting courses, and as I said before, what's their names? Old Mill Gallery. Ed and Lucy. Ed and Lucy run.
Well, they do it for painting, though, don't they?
Yeah, but they ran Tristing Trees course as well.
Oh, yes.
That's when we did we made charcoal. So we did charcoal, we made inks, we made paper, and did the pressing.
I guess I'd just like to know how to cook and make things, preserve, and all those things that
It's
were
possible,
part
yeah.
of
I
what
think, yeah,
people used
we'll,
to do.
we'll see. We'll put it on the,
Okay,
put it on the list.
Yeah, I'd just like to re-emphasize, you talked about grafting, and I think you really need to stress that if anyone's going to attempt any rewilding of apples, never, ever use grafted ones.
Yes,
Because
no,
you will
that's-
literally contaminate any
Yeah.
isolated stocks that way.
Yes,
it's
I know.
very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I was saying that we'd only use it in a seed orchard. I'm not a great advocate of the grafting, and I know Rick was doing a lot of work with it, and I think he's actually disenchanted with it as well. It was they first of all said put it onto M27 rootstock because it takes very well, and then bury it below the graft point, and then it'll start its own root from here, and then it will be true, but you're still going to get the dosage from the bottom. And then they said M106 because it'll be a bit faster growing, but yeah, no, to be pure, you've got to grow it from the pure seed. Yeah, I agree.
Brilliant. Thank you. So if there's no more questions in the room, and I've got questions, I just need to seamlessly check my laser display board. There is a question online. Just 1 second here. Oh my goodness, there's loads of questions and I totally overlooked these. I'm so sorry, Jules. If you want to get comfy just for a second, Jules. What's the best way to propagate? You've covered that, haven't you? Is it try not to hurry it
Planting
through
seeds.
grafting or anything like that? Try and do that absolutely.
Planting seeds from pure ones that that have been DNA tested.
I'm so sorry. A couple of these questions are from a wee while ago, so you might have answered, but I'll just ask them for completeness. Is there really only one native variety? So
Yes.
all apples that we understand, there's only actually one of them native variety.
Malus sylvestris, yes.
Brilliant. Where can we access the results report from your project, Jules? And that would be the Dumfries and Galloway Woodlands website, which is, I'll make sure it's in the email that comes out after this. We have plenty of very old crabapple trees. Is there a way we could test them? What could we do to support your project? I assume this is actually someone probably from outside the Galloway area. Do you know of other projects underway at the moment, Jules, or is this quite rare?
Do we, Mez? I don't know of any. I don't know of anybody. Well, apart from Rick Worrell, whether he's doing any more in other regions.
Brilliant.
Possible.
So we really are the hot spot. So
We are
people
the
should
hotspot.
have a look at the documents that are on our website. They've got all the names of the people involved in it. Question here, actually picking up perfectly on the comment at the back there, which was why would you graft them, given that this diminishes the status of native trees? I think you covered that, isn't it? It's a suboptimal situation. With the excuse me, with the great abundance of trees in Galloway and the prolific apple production of each tree, isn't just collecting apples easier than having a nursery? And I think that's probably you're not confident about the genetics. Probably is the answer to that, isn't it? Is the risk, isn't it? Would a crafted cultivar onto a wild crabapple rootstock have better resistance to the Galloway weather? Or I suppose, have you ever found a reason?
No,
No. That's probably a better way of answering that. Tour de force by Jules. Lots of positive comments. I'll ignore those, Jules. We are just starting a tree nursery in our orchard garden. Can you still grow from seed, but then move on before they are likely to cross-pollinate?
Yes. Before it flowers, yes.
And there's a great question here about ID guides. So there's a couple of questions already about how to ID. Is there anything written down, or can you point anyone to anything about IDing?
Probably the paper that Rick Worrell wrote, which is the genetics, the ecology and genetics of crabapple. It's got a very, very good description. But even they say the only way to really tell is to have them DNA tested.
The genetics, yeah. A suggestion, really, given that wild apples flourish in cowpats, which is a great takeaway point from this evening, I think. Would it be an idea to seek pure wild apple trees along the old drove roads? And you think, how lovely if the heritage
yes.
and use of an area has actually influenced the native crab apple.
Some of ours are on the drove roads, yes.
Cool. Brilliant.
But sometimes they'd be taken from somebody eating an apple and just chucking it down when they're like a domestic apple, you know. So you do have to be careful.
So it's a benefit to have the drove road as much as it's negative, absolutely. Brilliant, thank you. Seamlessly done with the questions. Yep, done that. Cool, brilliant. There's another one. There's one more question, Jules, just to scratch at this moment in time. So coming in online, Liz Ashburn. Has anyone tried rooting cuttings from DNA tested trees?
Yes, I think Rick has done that, and taking suckers as well, taking root cuttings and suckers. One of these pots, that pot over there, that's got suckers. That's taken from the carrot spit one. So, but I don't think it's any quicker. I don't think if you're trying, all these things are done to try and speed up the process. But actually, if you get a good cow pat, or mix some cow muck in with your potting compost, your actually sharp sand and you know, what sort of the soil or the substrate that you're using where the tree was, then you know, you get good growth.
Brilliant. Apples require
the key.
Apples require a different tree for pollination. Since you're talking about having crab apples 500 meters from each other, are crabs self-fertile, or are you recommending growing more than one crab near each other? That's probably been answered.
No, crab apples are self-fertile.
Yeah, and so the art is removing the other species that might.
They're hermaphroditic. They have both male and female reproductive parts, and they're also monoecious, I think is the word. They have both male and female flowers on the same tree, but not always on the same flower. So those have to be pollinated by pollinators.
Brilliant. I think we've got into one of those moments when the more questions I ask, the more questions I receive on my phone. So we'll just have a couple more questions here. And sorry to anyone online. So in Ayrshire, we could only find one pure apple. So got some Galloway apples and the seeds have germinated. So we're on our way. So what a great example of other areas looking at other areas looking at Galloway. So
yes,
that's quite hard.
They're very envious of our trees.
And a question here, are native trees too precious for us to pick fruit from?
No.
So, no, okay. You can be confident.
You can use the fruit, yes.
Brilliant. Superb. So thank you. Questions in the room and questions online there. So to round up, you might have a sales pitch for us, Jules.
Well, we have this beautiful tea towel, which I've been plugging all Christmas. But it has on it the website. It has a depiction of one of the myths and legends, which is of Prince Connla being given the apple from the fairy queen, which he accepts in exchange for longevity, in fact, to live forever. And he sails off in her crystal boat across the seas to an island where they live forever and ever and ever, which means an apple a day keeps the doctor away. See? Just proves it.
Cool.
So, the tea towel's got a map that's where some of our trees are. And if you look online, it's got the same map, but with the OS references down the side. They're unbleached cotton. They're very good quality. They dry your dishes beautifully. And they're just a tenner. And if you don't buy one tonight, there's plenty in Sunrise in Castle Douglas.
Superb. Could I ask for just one more round of applause for Jules this evening? It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you. So, as I look back on this event, which was hybrid in format, but not in content, I just want to say massive thanks to Jules, massive thanks to everyone from Dumfries and Galloway Woodlands who's helped us put this on behind the scenes. We do actually have another event scheduled for the end of February, looking at Lee Schofield, who's written Wild Fell, the story of rejuvenating nature in Lake District Farm. He's going to be talking to us, and I'll make sure that's in the email that comes out tomorrow with how to sign up if you're interested in that. Massive thanks to everybody involved. Please do stay if you're here. Please do stay and feel free to chat and have a look at some of the crabapple products on the table here, and maybe even buy a tea towel. And anyone online and around the world, thank you so much for joining us. So thank you. Thank you very much.